from the KELP studio in El Paso, this is 915 Talk.
And now your host.
Good afternoon, beautiful citizens of the Borderland. We are live at the KELP studios in El Paso, Texas. It is Friday, June 21st, and wherever you are right now, I hope that you'll join us for the next hour, because the intro of this program says, the world is looking at El Paso. What will we say to the world? And I look at all the things happening around the world, all of these events, all of these geopolitical struggles. You see Russia and Ukraine, you see maybe China and Taiwan, what's happening in Israel and Palestine. And in the middle of all these major global events, somehow El Paso and the border make it on national and international news. The world is looking at El Paso. And so often as we look at those news reports, it's not us in El Paso telling the story. It's people, journalists from outside of El Paso. So today we have a very special guest. And I know I say that every week. I say every week we have a special guest. Not just because every person who's ever been born is the unique expression of an endlessly creative God, but I am excited because this week it's my friend. I think every week it's my friend. And if they weren't my friend when they came on, it's my goal for them to be my friend by the time this hour's over. But he's an international man of mystery. And I feel like I need to make it clear before we get started. He is an American, okay? As I tell the rest of the story, people are going to be confused, like, who is this guy? But he is an American. He was born in Jordan, grew up in Jordan. He speaks fluent Arabic. He then went on to high school in the great nation of Cyprus. He then spent some time in his late teens and early 20s in Egypt. And then somehow he ended up here in El Paso. He is the executive director of Abara, which is a local nonprofit, and I just took this off their website. They inspire connections beyond borders through mutual understanding, education, and meaningful action. I'm not sure I understand what that means. So in the next hour, I hope we are able to unpack a little bit of that. But wherever you are, right now you might be in Deming or up in Oro Grande. I know in just a little bit I'm heading up to White Sands for Mariachi Under the Moon. You might be just finishing up your work week. You might already be at home, but wherever you are, let's put our hands together for the Mr. Sami DiPasquale!
Well, thank you, Andy.
Yeah, Sami, welcome. We met in 2000 in Wheaton, Illinois.
That's true.
Yes.
It was 2000, huh?
Yeah, and my future wife was just graduating from Wheaton College. And why were you there? Why were you in Wheaton? I don't even remember.
Well, I was there attending Wheaton, I believe, at the
Okay.
time, 2000. Yes. Was it December 2000?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I graduated December 2000 from Wheaton College. I went in a couple different stints.
Okay. You took collegiate stints. I like that.
Yeah.
So we've known each other for a long time, and it's been fun because we kind of kept in touch over the years because, full disclosure, our wives are good friends.
Very good friends.
Yes, very good friends. And so I tell people we're required to be friends because our wives are friends. But,
It's true.
but
I do remember when we were sitting there that time we met at a restaurant, and I think it was because you were getting married and you didn't know anybody, and I had never met you, and I didn't know anyone there because our wives were there together, and we sat next to each other, and I remember laughing the entire night.
We were having a lot of fun. Yeah, so I kept up over the years. We kept in touch, and then it's been fun the past couple years now that I'm living in El Paso to see each other more often. But we have a lot to jump into. But before we get into border issues, immigration, all these hot button issues that I'm afraid to even bring up on the radio.
It's scary.
It's scary. But before we get into all of that, I want you to tell me about the VW you bought in your early 20s.
Oh, you're going to make me cry.
Tell me what happened. First of all, what kind of VW was it? Is it a Bug? What are we talking?
It was a VW Vanagon.
A Vanagon. Okay.
A Vanagon, and it was orange on the bottom and cream on the top.
That's the most important technical specification that we remember. Okay.
It was a 1978.
Wow.
I believe. 1978.
Right.
It was perfect because, so I had come to Wheaton College for a couple of years, and then I left and I studied. I did a Middle East Studies program in Cairo, and then I stayed in Egypt for a while. Then I went to India for a year. Then I came back, and I was in the Wheaton area. And I worked very hard for a semester. I wasn't back at school, but I worked very hard painting a home and doing roofing to earn a couple $1,000s to buy this van so I could have my first vehicle, because I'd lived overseas. I was broke. I didn't have any money.
Right.
I spent every last dime on my whole, like $2,200 on this Vanagon.
Okay.
You want to know more?
Yes. Please continue, Sammy.
I was hoping you'd stop there.
No, please continue.
It was a dream to have
I've never heard this story, by the way.
Yeah, sure.
No, I tell all my guests I have informants everywhere. And I reached out to them this week for just compromising information on my guest. And they said, ask them about the VW. So tell me what happens next after you bought it.
So I had it for 2 days.
Okay.
And I was in bliss, so excited. My first vehicle ever.
Right.
And it was right before Christmas, and I was heading out of town. I actually had my sister and her husband and their baby child with me. And we're heading out of the Chicago area.
Right.
And we made it at least like 30 minutes. I mean, it could have been 40 minutes.
Right. Everyone's just enjoying the time together. Your van again. Life is finally coming together for Sami DiPasquale.
We are going to take this trip out to New York State to visit some family. And all of a sudden we hear this clink, clink, clink. Or it was a lot louder than that. But and it just died.
It just died
on the highway, so I let it cruise off to the side of the road. And then we were trying to figure out what on earth to do. I looked up anybody who could work on German vehicles. Right. I found Hans and Heinz.
Hans and Heinz?
Hans and Heinz.
Yes.
I had it towed there.
Okay.
They said, I think they said they'd look at it, but
they
for
said,
sure.
Achtung, we have a problem.
Yeah. For sure, we weren't going to be able to use it, so we ended up using a different vehicle to drive out to New York. And in the meantime, while I was out there, I can't remember if it was Hans or Heinz who called me, but they told me that it was going to need a completely new transmission. No, a new motor.
Those are the phone calls that you dread.
I hated that.
Yeah.
Apparently,
so you needed a new motor.
A bolt had come loose.
And
gone springing around all over the place and wrecked the entire motor.
Is it okay to laugh at you right now?
It's okay to laugh because then, that was so. Then I like when I came back after Christmas, I sort of like sat around, wondering, okay, God, what's next? I don't know what's next because
I don't have a VW. That was your whole life dream right there.
That was I'd spent all my money on it. I didn't necessarily. I had a place I could crash right then, but I didn't have a job. I was going to maybe go wander.
Right.
I was out of money because I'd spent it all on this beautiful cream and orange VW Vanagon.
Right.
Yeah.
So what did you do with the Vanagon after you found out that it was mortally wounded?
Well, Hans and Heinz were very kind. They said we can leave it here for a while and we'll keep an eye out for an engine that might work. They said normally if the Grateful Dead or Fish were going on tour.
That's high season for
high
sales.
Season for VWs to be coming through that break down and they might get parts.
That was your plan.
So that was their plan for me, and I went along with it.
Hans and Heinz waiting for the Grateful Dead to come to Chicago.
Yeah.
Okay.
So probably about, I can't remember how many months in, they were like, or maybe it was a year even. They were like, we haven't found one. You have to come pick it up. So then I towed it to my brother-in-law's, my wife's husband's parents' house into their driveway.
Right.
Waiting for the time that I had the money to fix it.
Right.
And it sat there for, I don't know, a couple of years. And then finally I was informed that I probably needed to get it out of their driveway.
Yeah.
And I sadly had it towed to a...
So I was told when it was in the driveway, it was used for something. Are my informants correct in this? Did you hang out in the?
So we would hang out in it sometimes. Yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
So we had rugs in there. It didn't have any back seat, or it had one back seat, I think.
Okay.
So it had a big empty space.
So you call your friends together and you're like, hey, let's
Hey.
go to my brother-in-law's parents' house and sit in the driveway.
I mean, what else are you going to do at 23? You tell me.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I could have been
know.
doing something else in perm, but I wasn't.
I can't think of anything better to do at 23 than hang out in a VW van in Chicago. But we're going to get back to that later because I think that does connect to where we're going in this conversation. But it is interesting to me that you grew up in Jordan, like I said, Cyprus, spent a lot of time in Egypt. You went, I'm sure, to a lot of other countries during that time. You're a third culture kid. You're American, but you didn't grow up in America. And you moved to El Paso. Because I think for kids who grew up internationally, they think a little bit differently. They're like, oh, I could spend the rest of my life in Singapore or Omaha or, Bangkok, wherever. But you came to El Paso. How did that come about?
Well, at the time that you and I met at that restaurant patio in Wheaton, Illinois, I was dating my future wife, Marianne, who was your wife's friend.
Right. Okay.
And Marianne is from El Paso.
Right.
And so I graduated probably soon after we met, and we ended up both staying in the Wheaton area. We weren't quite ready to follow each other anywhere. I was ready to leave, but happy to stay around to be near Marianne. So I ended up working for 3 years with World Relief, and World Relief is involved in faith-based relief and development work overseas, but also for years has been involved in refugee resettlement in the U.S. So I did that for about 3 years. In the meantime, Marianne and I got married, and I guess it was 2 years after we got married, we moved here to El Paso.
Right.
Initially, we thought it might just be for a year or two, or we definitely thought it would just be 2 or 3 years.
Right.
And now it's been 20. So that was in 2004. So ended up here, moving here with Marianne in 2004, and been here since.
Well, I think it's safe to say that you know El Paso pretty well. I think you know a lot of things about El Paso, more than even some of the native citizens. So I think this is probably a good time for us to go on to the next part of the program, and I'm going to ask Kenny on the board to be ready, because we're going to do rapid fire questions.
Uh-oh.
And I want you to just answer whatever you're really thinking. And there are right or wrong answers, but what we promise is not to ridicule you too much for wrong answers. And without further ado, Kenny on the board, hit up the lightning round.
Lightning round.
Okay, so first question. This is a culinary question. I've learned that I've had to say that because many of our guests had no idea what I was talking about. So it is a culinary question. The question is, red or green?
Green.
Green? Okay. And where do you like to answer that question the most?
Lucy's.
Lucy's. Wow, we're finally off our streak of L&J's, and I do appreciate that, Sammy. Where is Lucy's? I know nothing about Lucy's.
Lucy's Cafe is, well, the one I like to go to, the one I go to the most is connected to, I'm blanking on the name of the bar, but it's on Mesa near UTEP.
Okay.
They have another one that's closer to downtown on Mesa. They have multiple locations.
Okay. And next question.
King's X is right next to King's X Bar.
So
yeah.
green, you like to say green at Lucy's?
I do.
You like to say green at Lucy's?
A lot.
Okay. Okay, next question. Next question. Let's say you have a visitor coming to El Paso, and they're someone you hold in high regard. As a matter of fact, you hold them in such high regard that you're not going to have them spend the night in your VW in your driveway.
I don't know that I hold anyone in that high regard.
but this is hypothetical. They're staying in your house. You really want to show El Paso in a positive light. Now, in the past few weeks, I've only asked for one location. But I think this is a question you've thought a lot about. So I want you to give me 3 locations. You're going to take this person to show them El Paso or Juarez, the Borderland. 3 places you're going to take them. That's not a restaurant.
All right. Well, the first place I would take them is down to a former restaurant.
Okay.
The old Hacienda restaurant.
Okay. Anything going on down there? What is that?
Well, that's a property that Abara, the nonprofit I lead, a property that we're redeveloping into a Borderland center, and so there's a lot of things to see there. It's right on the border fence. It's one of the oldest buildings in El Paso, so that would be one of them.
Okay, yeah, I remember I was down there when I first arrived in El Paso, and we decided to go and just check out the fence, and we were immediately surrounded by 4 Border Patrol guys on quads. That was interesting. So that's a great experience for visitors to El Paso. So number 1 is the old Hacienda. We're going to get more into that later. What's the second place?
Second place, if they're willing, I would take them over to Juarez and probably go to the Central Plaza in Juarez. If they're really willing, probably wander into the sort of the local marketplace there.
Okay. And what's the highlight of the local market in Juarez?
Well, this time of year it's super hot.
Okay.
So they can get a really good feel for the heat here in El Paso and Juarez.
Right. Okay.
I mean, it's bustling. You can buy you could buy a parakeet, or you could buy some guava, or you could buy some a jersey for
a parakeet.
Yeah, like
that's
the New
a
York
really good
Mets,
idea if you're crossing back into the United States.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, the bird can fly over. I mean, you might have a hard time getting back. But
Gotcha. Okay.
You can also get some street tacos there, like in a little corner place.
Okay.
It's pretty great.
All right. Number 3 place.
Number 3 place, I'd probably go to the downtown El Paso Plaza. Yeah.
Downtown El Paso Plaza.
Sort of wander around there, look at some of the buildings, maybe
well,
get in.
That's a great answer, and I thank you. We had, I don't know how many weeks in a row that everyone said Scenic Drive, which is also a good answer.
It's also a good spot.
Yeah, there's lots of good spots, but
I'd take them there too.
Yeah,
but when someone's visiting, I have a lot more than 3 places I can take them.
Yeah, I know. That's
I'll
why we're limiting it to 3, Sammy.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, I like Scenic Drive too.
Okay, all right. So you get to the main plaza in El Paso. That's a great segue into my next question. There is an animal theme.
Mm-hmm.
What is that animal?
The crocodile.
The alligator or crocodile?
The alligator, okay.
Yeah. There's a sculpture of alligators in the center of that plaza. How many alligators are in that sculpture?
2. 3.
3. He said 3. Hit it up. Yeah. So yes. It is 3. Okay. All right. Final question of the lightning round. Let's say you had the opportunity to send a text message to everyone in the Borderland, and it would come to them in the language they're most comfortable with, English, Spanish, whatever. What would that text message say?
It would say, come to the binational concert we're having tonight at the old crossing of the Rio Grande at the Hacienda at 6 p.m. And we're going to have a number of bands. We might have a symphony with half of it on each side of the border.
Is that really happening tonight?
No.
Oh. But that's your dream.
That's the text I would send out.
Okay. So, a lot of disappointed people showing up for the concert. Okay.
Or maybe save the date.
Save the date.
Keep a watch out for.
Okay. Gotcha. All right. Well, we're going to get into border issues here a little bit. And it's kind of like, when I was growing up in Ohio, at family gatherings, there were certain things you weren't supposed to talk about. And I feel like, this is faith-based radio here at KELP, and I'm new to El Paso, so I feel like I don't know answers for the crisis that we're currently going through. But I also feel like in the church, it's a very polarizing issue. It's an issue that people are afraid to even bring up. So I feel like we need to move past that, have some conversations, be open to hearing each other out. There seems to be kind of two ends of the spectrum. You know, one is very high compassion. The other is let's build a wall to the moon. There doesn't seem to be any space in the middle. And you're going into Juarez all the time. You're looking at these border issues all the time. So I'd like to hear some of your thoughts on that. But before that, we're going to go and have a break. And do not touch that dial.
We'll be right back. Don't touch that dial.
Hey, El Paso and Southern New Mexico. Thank you for listening to 915 Talk. KELP Christian Radio would love to just build a relationship with you, hear from you, get your feedback on all of the programs. You can send your feedback by going to the contact form at kelpradio.com and just sending us a note, letting us know what programs you love, and that really helps us as we pray for the future. Also, please be sure to follow us on Facebook. You'll find us at the page is called KELP Christian Radio, and just hit that follow button, and then you can keep up with the latest station news. Finally, and probably most importantly, go to KELPradio.com and look for that 915 pray link, especially if you've been missing the 9:15 a.m. and 9:15 p.m. prayer for the 915. Listen to a few of those prayer requests and join us in prayer. Let's continue to pray together and believe together for our region.
We're back. You're listening to 915 Talk.
We are back, and you are listening to 915 Talk. And I do want to say at this point, we're about to get into a part of the program where we're talking about border issues. You are very welcome to send in your feedback either through question or comment, but you'll need to text. So only do this if you're not driving. If you're driving and you just really need to send us a message, please pull over first. But the message to send in the text is 915-265-8489. Again, it's 915-265-8489, and we'll get to as many of those text messages as possible. So, Sammy, again, I'm new to El Paso. I've only been here a couple years. I'm learning. I'm enjoying learning about this city. And when we talk about the border crisis, I was just on the internet the other day looking at the history of El Paso, and this subject came up, and it was the Bath Riots of 1917. Have you heard of those before?
I have.
Okay. So what is your understanding of what happened during the Bath Riots of 1917?
So I'm definitely not an expert on it, but from what I've read and heard, essentially many of the sort of migrant laborers or farm workers or day laborers who were crossing the border from Mexico were being fumigated, in essence. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, I mean, there like accounts were with kerosene or with some sort of gas to essentially like kill the bugs.
Okay.
That was what was said.
Yeah.
And so I think there was a general feeling of dehumanization, of targeting based on race, and other things that basically led to a backlash.
Okay. So there was a backlash. Kerosene was being thrown on Mexicans who were crossing the border on a daily basis. Is kind of the
I don't know if it was always that, like, but it wasn't. It was, I think, various forms were used.
Uh-huh.
Like sometimes there was gas.
So
Zyklon B was actually used,
Okay.
and Germany even came and studied what we were doing on the border and took it back and intensified it later on within the Holocaust.
Okay.
Sort of use it in different ways. So we were not using it in any lethal way, but it was sort of experimentation too on, like, okay, how do we, like, if we use it to a certain degree, like, it can kill bugs, but it obviously is not going to be good for human beings. So.
Right. Okay. So this was in 1917, over 100 years ago. Kind of my understanding from just quickly reading on the internet was it was a Mexican girl who was a cleaner, kind of got upset about this whole thing, and somehow for a day there was kind of a riot there on that bridge that's right downtown today. And I think the reason I wanted to bring it up is because I was, again, as I still call myself an outsider to El Paso. I was kind of shocked that this border crisis is not something new. I think sometimes we think this is something that started, a few years ago or in 2008 or whatever the case may be. So how do you see the history of the border? When did this tension first start, or where did it come from?
Well, I think that's one of the things that, referenced about this historic crossing at the hacienda that we love to look at, or that it really lends itself to, is thinking about this issue back through history.
Uh-huh.
So trying to connect the dots literally for 500 years.
Okay.
This area, and specifically that river crossing that's right next to the historic hacienda restaurant, was a connecting route, with pathways under indigenous communities.
Mm-hmm.
And then hence that's exactly where the Spanish came across to colonize this area, where Juan de Oñate came in 1598.
Okay.
Then there was 200 years of Spanish control, then Mexican independence, and all of that before this area was part of the United States. Technically, we were part of the Republic of Texas for that short time frame before Texas was part of the U.S. At least on the maps, from what I understand, there was not like operational control for the Republic of Texas. It was still, by and large, Mexico.
So we're talking what years?
1836 to 1848.
Okay.
So the U.S.-Mexico War then started in the 1840s, ends in 1848. So at that point, El Paso, where we're sitting now, is part of the United States, and the other side of the river is part of Mexico.
Since 1848.
Since 1848.
Okay.
And since then, I think, in the very early days of it being part of the U.S., the population was very small. It wasn't until the railroad hit in 1881 that El Paso really expanded. So if we go back even earlier from what you were saying in 1917, at least if we just even go back to this being the United States, we can sort of see trends of who's been welcomed at different points or not welcomed, or sometimes welcomed for a season and then not welcomed. So maybe the earliest version of that we saw was with the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. And that was really right after the railroads in this area and a lot of the West were completed with Chinese labor, by and large. In this area, there was a crew of 300 who started a Chinatown in South El Paso, right next to the bridge you're talking about, the Paso del Norte bridge. So the Chinatown started in 1881. 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act was enacted.
So 1 year later?
1 year later, after the railroads being finished.
So the Chinese built the railroad and then they were kicked out.
So it wasn't so much being kicked out, but it was like excluding anyone new from entering.
Okay.
And it was almost entirely a young male labor force.
Right.
And so if there was any hope of sort of staying in the United States, because they couldn't intermarry, then they would need to be married to someone coming from China or Southeast Asia. And so if you went back to get married and then came back, you couldn't come back in, or someone new couldn't come back in.
Okay.
But that heralded in what became known as the Chinese Underground Railroad. And so Chinese would go to Mexico and then sneak across the border without, illegally. And the epicenter of that was El Paso, Juarez. And the even micro epicenter of that was the Chinatown right by that bridge.
Okay.
And they built tunnels underneath Chinatown to hide and move around those who would just come in, and then they'd carry on to Philadelphia or New York.
Tunnels. It's like Ecclesiastes. There's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah. Well, and those tunnels became more known when Pancho Villa used them during the Revolution.
Okay.
Closer to the time period you're talking about. So most people refer to them as Pancho's tunnels, but many of them were dug by the Chinese.
Okay.
And so, yeah, it is fascinating because even
there wasn't a wall then.
There was no wall, right?
Right?
No, there was no wall.
So like how was the border guarded?
So at that time period, I mean, it's been called different things over time, so it wasn't called Border Patrol, but like the precursor to Border Patrol was literally created, and we know this from our friends at Border Patrol.
Okay.
It was the few dozen agents that were patrolling the entire U.S.-Mexico border. Their sole purpose to begin with, not quite, but their sole purpose was to stop Chinese from sneaking across the border, which is not I only learned this in the last couple years, and it blew my mind, because who would have thought that the original Border Patrol was really stopping people from China coming across the southern border in the 1880s and 90s and early 1900s.
So it probably is fair to say, like, I guess what's blowing my mind is there's no wall, but they still did all the trouble of building tunnels. They didn't just like sneak over at night on a canoe. Well,
they did. Sorry. Yeah. So as far as I know, the tunnels weren't going under the river. So you'd sneak across the river and then you'd hide out in the tunnels on the U.S. side underneath Chinatown.
Oh, okay.
And then elsewhere, like around El Paso.
Thank you for that clarification.
As far as I know, the thing is, I mean, even with these questions you're asking, we're trying to uncover these stories right now. So a lot of these are just collected over time through experts, historians, readings. But that's fairly well known, about those tunnels.
Yeah. Okay. So that's all super interesting, and I know that Abara, your organization, does what's called a border encounter. I've never done a border encounter, and this might just be confession time, just being open. But
I knew you hadn't, Andy, in case you were wondering.
So since we're now live on the radio, can you tell me what's involved in a border encounter? I've never had the opportunity to ask you that before.
Yeah. Well, so a border encounter is like a 2 to 3 day opportunity for someone or a group. Usually it's a group, and usually it's like a church, let's say from Kansas City, that has reached out saying, we're really trying to wrap our heads around what's happening at the border. We feel like there's a call for us biblically to have compassion. We also feel like we know that we need laws related to our borders, and we don't know what to think about this. Can you help us humanize this situation outside of the news cycle, outside of the political cycle?
Okay.
So groups, again, it's almost all from out of town, will come to try to learn. And so over the course of the 3 days, it's getting people in front of a whole bunch of diverse communities and speakers from the community.
Okay.
And it's really to try to give them the opportunity to hear firsthand from these different voices.
Okay, so what are some of those voices?
So, for instance, we would go over to Juarez and we'll be go to a church shelter. So there's a network of a couple of dozen of church shelters in Juarez, and some of those are really small, some of those are a little bigger, but most of the churches have opened their doors in some sacrificial way because they feel like they've been called to do that when they see someone vulnerable on the streets. So we'll visit there, and there's a chance to interact with people who are hoping to seek asylum in the U.S. Sometimes we'll do the same on the U.S. side and visit a shelter here. Right. So you sort of interact with someone who's on the move, and meet with them, and be able to have conversations. And sometimes it's just fun games, and again, just almost like humanizing this story. Who is the face behind the headlines? Right. So that's one example. We also meet with Border Patrol, and hear from Border Patrol. What are they seeing? What's their perspective?
What are they seeing? What is their perspective?
So it's interesting because there's a Border Patrol public relations office, as you would imagine, and every sector has one. We're in the El Paso sector, which is far west Texas and all of New Mexico. So there's certain lines that sort of they'll share about, and certain things that aren't shared about. And I've listened in on these presentations for 20 years, and so it's fascinating to see some of sort of what sort of shifts over time. But right now, what Border Patrol is often saying is, I think Border Patrol has felt in a position where they felt vilified, and like they're the brunt of whatever anger and frustration the nation has had about our borders, like it's their fault.
Right.
So a lot of what Border Patrol agents are in themselves trying to humanize their story, which makes sense. I mean, that's part of the border encounter, is like, how do we humanize all these voices where it's not that someone is the hero and someone is the villain and someone is purely good and someone's purely evil, but there's a mix of these stories of humanity. And so like oftentimes the Border Patrol agents in the PR departments have had their own immigration story. They're not anti-immigration. They're like, we have these laws and we're trying to enforce these laws. Yeah, thanks for the word. And they have been frustrated for a decade or more, like 8-10 years, because, and again, this is coming from them, because our immigration laws have not been updated in about 40 years.
Really?
Right, in any significant way. So you'll hear, the Biden administration or the Trump administration or the Obama administration that like have done certain things, but they haven't updated the actual laws. There's been these executive orders all functioning within the general law that Congress and that has passed.
Okay.
There hasn't been a meaningful update since the 1980s.
Okay.
Think about what's changed since the 1980s. And most things have gotten updated.
Right.
So for instance, from what I understand, I might be wrong, but from what I've heard, Canada updates, they have to update their immigration laws to reflect their current realities every decade.
Okay.
Which you're like, oh, that sort of makes sense. It's a new reality. You need different forms of labor, and you're thinking, you're sort of like, okay, it's not going to be perfect. It's never going to be perfect, but you've updated it somewhat to reflect the current realities. Yeah. And something triggers to where they have to update it. They have to come to some consensus across party lines and update it. Mm-hmm. In the U.S., we don't have that. So it has to be proactive. Someone has to put forward some new bill, and we haven't been able to get anything passed for the last, for decades. So it's interesting.
Why is that?
Well, it's usually because it gets held up in one corner, one far edge of the political spectrum, whether the far right or the far left.
Okay.
In the Senate, it doesn't get held up as much because senators are having to cover the whole state and think about that whole community. But we've heard from people that have visited, if we can frame the border as being the problem, and therefore that we have, whatever our party stance is, that we've got the solution. If we can frame it that way, then we can raise a lot of money and a lot of votes.
Okay.
So in some instances, we've heard there's no interest in solving this because it's a big money. Whichever side you're on, you can talk about it a certain way and raise money and votes. We've literally had people that have worked on campaigns for like congressional and senators who have said you have no idea how easy it is. If we can frame the border as being dangerous and immigrants as being dangerous, then it's really easy. It's so easy to get money and votes. It's a no-brainer. And they're like, after visiting, we're not going to be able to do that anymore. Mm-hmm. Because we've seen sort of the stories of humanity and the complexity and understanding some of the damage that's causing.
Right. Okay.
So that's some of the. We're not trying to. We don't have some single lens that we would say you're someone from a border, like when you come on a border encounter, you're supposed to come out with this one idea. We know there's a whole lot of ideas that people come out with, but we want people to be informed and having heard firsthand from the voices of the borderlands. Sometimes we're hearing from ICE officials. We'll visit ICE detention facilities and hear from them.
ICE, for those who are not from the border area.
Okay, sorry, yeah. Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
Right.
And so they deal with issues internally related to immigration. Border Patrol deals on the border in between legal ports of entry, and then CBP, Customs and Border Protection, are actually at the points of entry, like on the bridge. So you have those three agencies that sometimes are used interchangeably, but they have a distinct sort of jobs that they have.
Okay, so you have these churches come in. You're trying to show all perspectives. It's not just let's go to a refugee camp in Juarez and feel bad. It's also finding out what the realities are on the border with the legislation and everything from the point of view of the Border Patrol. I guess my question is a little bit crude, but what difference does it make? Like, why is it important to know these things?
Yeah.
For a church from Kansas City.
Yeah. Well, I think it'd be maybe I'll respond by just saying what people have told us, or even why they're coming and what they're excited about going back. I would say one trend we see very clearly is whether people are really conservative or really liberal, because we get some people from a wide spectrum.
Do they come in the same group?
Sometimes. And then it makes it really interesting and fun and sometimes tense.
Yeah.
But I think it's beautiful, and that's why we're here, and that's why we're doing it.
Yeah.
And if it's a church group coming and they're trying to think of it through a lens of faith, then I think it's a really beautiful thing. and a subject matter that the church should be stepping into. They're coming because it's relevant to them. And so that relevancy is going back. So what I was, that first part that I was talking about was like whether someone's conservative or liberal, almost everyone arrives afraid. So that narrative of fear about the border and the border cities being dangerous has really sunken in to the public psyche around the country. So we have groups that it'll be like, well, where's the invasion? We'll be sitting at the hacienda, for instance, looking at the fence, and they'll say, so can you, like, it's obviously not right here, so can you take us where it is? And they're sort of like, well, where are all the crowds of people, right? And the reality is that there are crowds of people sometimes in very specific places for specific moments.
Okay.
So like for a while, there was a few months where near Sacred Heart, you had a lot of people outside.
Okay.
And it's complicated why exactly they were there. But the point I'm making is like every news station from around the world focused on this one square block.
Yeah.
And so people's impression of what El Paso was like is that one square block for that one, for those weeks or months that people were there. Well, my kids went to school 4 blocks away.
Yeah.
I made a habit of dropping them off at school and then driving down towards Sacred Heart and going and heading into work.
Yeah.
And 4 blocks away there was 0 people on the streets. 3 blocks away there was 0 people on the streets. 2 blocks away there was a few people. 1 block away there was like 10 or 12. And then I'd hit the block that was like sectioned off and there was a lot of people there. But it's like I was always thinking like, wow, if a news agency actually just sort of like, hey, drove down the street for 30 seconds, you'd get a better feel for what life is like on the border than just that one image. But of course, that's what people are going to click on and what's going to attract the attention. But people really, really think that El Paso is crazy dangerous.
Yeah, well, I had friends call me from around the world at that time, concerned for my safety.
Yeah.
And I was finding out the news from them.
Right. right.
So it was an interesting time. But so you mentioned, a church from Kansas City, for example. You probably have a lot of churches from El Paso who want to do border encounters?
We haven't had too many.
Okay.
Well, we've had a lot of people interested in our work, and we have quite a few churches that support the work. Nobody has done a full 3 days. It's a little bit hard.
Wait, hold on. You're telling me that no one from any church in El Paso has ever done a full day?
No.
A full 3-day border encounter?
There's a handful of people from various churches who have, but no church as a church has been like, hey, we want to do this.
Why do you think that is?
Because
I was talking to someone who does ministry in Mexico, and he was talking about how I won't name his ministry, but he was talking about how churches will come in from all over the United States to serve in Juarez, serve all around Chihuahua, but it's all near but impossible to get churches from El Paso to go and do their service work. Why do you think that is?
Well, I can't speak to them, but I think for us, probably 2 main things. One, I mean, if you're going to take a few days off of work to do something, you're probably going to want to leave town and like go even on a missions trip somewhere else or some trip somewhere else. And 2, I think really like most people are like, well, we live here, we know sort of what's going on.
Yeah. Do you think they do know what's going on?
I think very few do. I think very few understand the complexity of what's going on, and certainly have had of the variety of experiences that we try to sort of provide within a border encounter. Okay. Yeah, I think very few do. And I think it's a great opportunity. We can do. I mean, we're happy to form things in a way that would be a little more convenient. Like, for instance, maybe a 1-day session or a half day, because to get someone for 3 days, it's harder. We do tend to get professionals like adults, as opposed to some other groups who have private high schools that visit or private colleges that do. And we get some of those, but mostly it's like to go back to an example of Kansas City, the missions board of that church cares so deeply about what's happening, partially because what we're helping them do is connect the dots between what's happening globally with root causes to what's happening along refugee highways to then what's happening at the border, and then most important to them, what's happening in their backyard across the street.
Right. So what's happening at their backyard, and how are they becoming involved?
So a lot of times churches, maybe they already have some involvement with ministries in their own communities that are working in immigrant communities, and they decide they really want to strengthen those or really search those out. And so a dream for us is like if a church, like as they're thinking through this as a big picture global issue, if they would think about how they could get involved. Let's say if it's part of a denomination, let's say it's Methodist Church, let's identify a Methodist church in Guatemala or Colombia or somewhere that is actually really working on the ground, trying to stabilize the situation on the ground.
Wow.
Let's partner there.
So they're trying.
Let me just finish or I'll forget the thought. So get involved there. Maybe get involved with something that's happening on the border and support some of the church networks here, and then also get involved in their own backyard. So like sort of global border backyard.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So Guatemala, I think, is probably a good example, and you can speak into that more. But there's a crisis happening there, and because of that, there's pressure on our border here, in basic terms. Correct.
Correct.
Yeah. So what they're looking at is how they can serve in Guatemala so that people don't feel the need to immigrate, or what is.
Well,
what is happening?
I think. As the understanding deepens about like what's happening in terms of this crisis, because we're seeing more people's forcibly displaced, feeling like they can't live in their homes due to the circumstances than any time in history. We're seeing more people displaced than any time in history. Right now, it's about 1 in 70 individuals, a crazy amount
in the world is displaced
from their home.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't, in your church, I don't know how many people are there. Imagine a multiplication of 70.
Yeah.
Whatever percentage of them are going to be not here anymore because they're displaced. So as the churches understand this is a global issue and understand, the border isn't the full solution to what's going on here.
Right.
The border is just a reflection of what's happening elsewhere. And sure, we need to really figure things out on the border, but the problem is so much deeper. And why don't we try to get it even to like deeper root causes? Because the border is not the root cause. Yeah. So let's try to help be good neighbors globally, and then also good neighbors locally. So they're able to like connect that maybe with a group that is working with Guatemalans literally within a few blocks of their church, but then also connect back to maybe some of those home villages that.
Because I mean that's interesting that you're thinking about that and kind of getting involved back at that root source, because it's kind of like my very basic surface impression of the way the church in America prays is often, Lord, just protect us, and not thinking about the fact that it's not probably his highest will for a man to have to leave his family, or for these families in Guatemala to be split up. And so there's that crisis as well. And how can we be praying for those families and for those countries where those people are coming from? How can we become involved there so that, because first of all, that's maybe God's highest, but also it would relieve some of the pressure here.
Yeah, I think it's a game changer. Most people say like the most significant times was just being in a shelter, which is this person's temporary home, and being across the table playing Jenga with some kids and moms and dads, and watching like this familial love like of a child with their mom, and the laughing and like the reaction as you're pulling the piece out of the Jenga game, like that human reaction. And even if someone's not a strong Spanish speaker and they can't even like sort of communicate with words, they've somehow like had this connection where they're like, I really want good for these people across from me, and I know like I have a sense inside of me that they're not sensing ill will towards me, and then that like all of a sudden this isn't a huge issue of immigration, this is like a care for a precious human being made in the image of God.
Right.
And they want to do anything they can for the safety of that mom and her kids.
Right.
And I think that has to be our starting point when we talk about it's like, how do I relate to you across the table from me? And then my ideas about politics or whatever it is come from that.
Right.
Because if it's reversed, then I think for sure we're getting things wrong in the kingdom of God, like in that sense, where it's like,
right.
This is not, if anything that we're deciding on is really creating direct harm for another child made in the image of God, then I don't know, when we talk about, just the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven, I think we have to start with other, human being to human being.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean it's not complicated. And we don't try to present that it's uncomplicated. It's not at all. It's very complicated. Mm-hmm. And we recognize that. And that's part of what people walk away with. Oh, we thought this was like a simple problem with a simple solution. We realize there's like 20 things involved. And sometimes that feels paralyzing, but in other times it's like, oh, well, I can do one or two or three of those pieces. I can make some difference.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I in the time that we have left, I want to ask a couple kind of big questions. But before I do that, I want to tell people that our listeners that if you want to find out more about what Abara is doing, you can go to abara.org. ABARA.org.
ABARA.org.
Yeah.
Yep.
And look at what they're doing. Check out the project with the hacienda. It is amazing. It's a cool place. And, getting back to when we talked about your Volkswagen being your broken down Volkswagen being a meeting place, it's kind of, this is on a much larger scale. And I do hope that text message will come true someday of this cross-border concert. Sounds like a lot of fun. I'm definitely going to be there. Before we end our time today, my first question is, why do you think that El Paso matters? Because you've given a lot of your life to El Paso.
Yeah. I love El Paso, and I would draw that out to El Paso and Juarez as a binational community, and that's one of the things that we try to really express to people. Is it's really hard to understand this area without thinking about El Paso and Juarez as one metropolis split down the middle by a border. Mm-hmm. And in some ways we're so incredibly connected. In some ways we're very divided, very literally, obviously. And so I actually think that reality is what makes El Paso, it's like the most special in a sense, is that there are not, back to just growing up around the world, visiting, I've probably been in, 30, 40 countries, been to a lot of borders. There's not too many cities divided in the middle by a border,
right,
connected in this way. And I think like that binational element, the bicultural element, the bilingual element, all of this coming together is incredible. You mentioned third culture kid about me as a individual. My parents from one country, me growing up in another, sort of taking elements of both those culture into a third culture. I think of this region as a third culture city.
Yeah.
And so because it's you have all these elements of Mexico that are present here, and you have elements culturally that come more from the U.S., and it's like this new thing is created and people feel it. And when people visit, they sense it and they walk away and they were like, I literally came very scared and I'm walking away thinking this is one of the most friendly, hospitable places I've ever been. Mm-hmm. I think that is, key to why El Paso is so special. I also think it's incredibly strategic. A lot of times we think of ourselves, I hear at least El Pasoans saying, like, they think that, we're the edge of Texas.
Right.
We're way out in this corner across all these hundreds of miles of deserts. Oh, we're the edge of the country. We literally are the edge of the country.
Yeah.
So if you're only framing it from a national or state perspective, we're the edge. But if you pull back and look at North America, we're the middle.
Right.
And we were in the middle of these massive crossroads. And so I think in that sense, even where it's like the margins become the center. Mm-hmm. And yes, we're on the edge of just looking at it from a certain perspective, but we're at the middle of these crossroads, and that's where we have so much to offer the country. both like just coming to experience the Borderlands in a human way, but also on a faith perspective. Like, what does this mean? Like, what matters? How are we moving forward as individuals and as a people? Like, what are the decisions we are making, and like thinking of it on a human perspective before. I mean, obviously, like on a human, God-infused perspective before thinking about it on a national perspective.
Mm-hmm. Love that. Okay, so last question. We're faith-based radio, so I'll ask it this way. What is your prayer for El Paso?
That's a great question. I think, and we could think of it on an individual level, but on a city level, sort of like to really, my prayer is that El Paso and Juarez together can like fully lean into the identity that God has given us, in the sense like really like fully live into this binational, bicultural element, and that's what makes us so special. For some, I think it's like they're wanting to run away from that, but I think that's the middle of that's our superpower, and that's what God's given us as a community. And instead of run away from it, how do we embrace that, and how can we really be a beacon for others around the country and the world about what it means to be in a borderlands and to connect beyond these sort of our physical borders and connect across these divides.
Okay, that's a big prayer. So thank you, Sami, for coming in today. I feel like we could easily have talked another hour or two, and I'm sure sometime we will off the air. But I just would like to encourage our audience, to those listening out there, let's be in prayer for our community. You know, we have 915 Pray each week, each weekday at 9:15 a.m. and 9:15 p.m. where we're praying for the 915. We're praying for our community. Let's be aware of what's going on around us. Let's not put our head in the sand when it comes to border issues, and let's be open to hearing from each other, listening to each other. Again, we've been with Sami DiPasquale from Abara, and you can hear more about them or read more about them at abara.org. And 915 Talk, this program, will be rebroadcast tomorrow at 10 a.m. and also be available in podcast format starting next week. So thanks again for listening. This has been 915 Talk.
You have been listening to 915 Talk on KELP Christian Radio. To listen to past recordings of 915 Talk, just visit KELPradio.com and click on the 915 Talk link. Until next time, love your neighbor, love your city, and give God all the glory.